They said money talks, but in a city blinded by gold, silence is the most dangerous weapon of all. When the man in the faded grey coat walked into the Gilded Oak, the city's most exclusive restaurant, the wealthy patrons didn't see a human being. They saw a stain on their perfect evening. They mocked him. They tried to throw him out. They thought he was nobody. They were wrong. They didn't know that the only person in the room who understood his power and his language was the waitress pouring his water. And when she finally spoke, their world shattered. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Sophie Bennett wiped a smudge from the mahogany surface of table 4, her feet throbbing in the sensible black shoes she was required to wear. It was 7:15 p.m. on a Tuesday at the Gilded Oak, and the air already smelled of truffle oil, expensive cologne, and judgment. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was an arena where the city's elite came to flash their Amex Black cards and discuss mergers in hushed, self-important tones. Sophie adjusted her apron. She was 24, overqualified, and drowning in student debt from a linguistics degree that everyone told her was useless. For now, she wasn't a polyglot with a passion for obscure European dialects. She was just the girl with the water pitcher. Sophie, table 9. Now, Roger Banks, the floor manager, hissed into her ear. Roger was a man who sweated anxiety. He treated the reservation book like a holy scripture and the customers like vengeful gods. Sophie looked toward the entrance. The heavy oak doors had just swung open, letting in a gust of cold wind and a figure that made the entire dining room pause. He wasn't wearing Armani. He wasn't wearing Tom Ford. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat that looked like it had been bought 3 decades ago and slept in for 2. His hair was silver, thick but unkempt, damp from the rain. He held a canvas tote bag rather than a briefcase. A hush rippled through the front section. Forks paused halfway to mouths. "Who let him in?" Roger muttered, his face turning a blotchy shade of panic. "Security is supposed to filter the riffraff." The man didn't wait to be seated. He moved with a slow, heavy gait, his eyes fixed on the floor, and sat himself down at table 9, the prime corner booth with the panoramic view of the Space Needle. "Oh, no," Roger groaned. "That is reserved for Mr. Calloway's party. Sophie, get him out, politely. But get him out." Sophie hesitated. She watched the man settle into the velvet booth. He didn't look drunk or aggressive. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man carrying the weight of an invisible mountain. "Roger, maybe we can just offer him a seat at the bar," Sophie suggested softly. "It's pouring outside." "The bar is for paying customers, Sophie. Look at him. He's going to order a cup of hot water and steal the silverware. Go. Move him." Sophie sighed and walked across the plush carpet. As she approached table 9, she felt the eyes of the other diners burning into her back. They were waiting for the spectacle. They wanted to see the intruder ejected, so they could go back to their foie gras without being reminded of the poverty outside. She reached the table. The man was staring out the window at the rain-streaked glass. Up close, his coat was frayed at the cuffs, but his hands were clean. His face was lined with deep crevices, a roadmap of a long, hard life. "Excuse me, sir?" Sophie said, keeping her voice gentle. The man turned. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, startlingly bright against his weathered skin. He looked at her, then down at the menu, then back at her. He didn't speak. He just tapped the glass of water on the table. "Sir, I'm afraid this table is reserved," Sophie tried again. The man blinked. He reached into his coat pocket. Sophie flinched, instinctively stepping back, and saw a few diners at nearby tables gasp, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and placed it on the table. He pointed to the bread basket on the server's station, and then to the water. He wasn't aggressive. He was hungry. Sophie felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The policy was strict. No reservations. No service. No jacket. No service. But looking at his shaking hands, she couldn't do it. "I'll get you some water," she whispered, "and some bread. Just stay low, okay?" She turned back to the station. Roger was watching her like a hawk from the host stand, tapping his watch. She grabbed a pitcher and a basket of warm sourdough, blocking Roger's view with her body as she slid them onto table 9. The man nodded once, a microscopic dip of the chin. "Thank you," he murmured, but the words were garbled, heavy with an accent she couldn't place immediately. It sounded guttural, ancient. Sophie poured the water. "Take your time," she said softly. She walked away, hoping he could finish and leave before the real trouble arrived. But luck, as usual, was not on Sophie's side. The front doors banged open again. This time, the silence in the room wasn't out of shock. It was out of reverence. Preston Calloway had arrived. Preston Calloway didn't just walk into a room, he annexed it. He was 32, a venture capitalist who had made a fortune shorting pharmaceutical stocks. He wore a navy bespoke suit that cost more than Sophie's car, and his teeth were whitened to a blinding, unnatural shade of porcelain. Flanking him were 2 associates, men who laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny, and a woman named Jessica, who was currently scrolling through Instagram, looking bored. Roger Banks practically sprinted to the door, his spine dissolving into jelly. "Mr. Calloway, welcome, welcome, right on time." "Roger," Preston said, not looking at him, scanning the room instead. "I'm starving. Tell me the chef has the Wagyu tonight. I've got investors coming in from Tokyo next week. I need to know if the quality is holding up." "Of course, Mr. Calloway. Only the best for you. Please, right this way." Roger gestured grandly toward the back of the room, towards the private alcoves. Preston stopped. He frowned. "The back?" "No, Roger. I told your assistant I wanted the window. Table 9. I like to see the city I own." Roger froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He glanced nervously at table 9. The old man in the grey coat was still there, slowly tearing a piece of sourdough bread and dipping it into his water. He looked entirely at peace, oblivious to the shark entering the tank. Preston followed Roger's gaze. His perfectly groomed eyebrows shot up. "Is that a joke?" Preston asked, his voice carrying across the silent dining room. "Roger, why is there a homeless person at my table?" Sophie, standing near the kitchen pass, closed her eyes. "Here we go. Mr. Calloway." "I'm so sorry," Roger stammered, wringing his hands. "A mix-up. He wandered in. I was just about to have security remove him." "Well, hurry up," Preston snapped, snapping his fingers. "I don't want to smell wet wool while I'm eating lobster." He didn't lower his voice. He wanted the room to hear. He wanted everyone to know that he was the alpha, and this intruder was beneath consideration. Roger marched over to table 9, his fear of Preston overriding his basic human decency. Sophie moved too, instinctively stepping in, though she didn't know what she could do. "Sir," Roger said, his voice loud and harsh, "you need to leave. Now." The old man looked up, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. He looked at Roger, then passed him to Preston, who was checking his reflection in a spoon. The old man said nothing. He simply placed the bread down and reached for his water. "Are you deaf?" Roger demanded, grabbing the edge of the table. "This is a private establishment. You are trespassing. Get out before I call the police." The old man's blue eyes hardened. He spoke again, that same low, rumbling mutter. It wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish or French. It sounded like stones grinding together in a riverbed. "I don't speak gibberish," Roger spat. Preston chuckled, strolling over, a glass of champagne already in his hand, plucked from a passing tray. He leaned against the booth, looming over the seated man. "Hey, Pops," Preston smirked. "You lost? The shelter is 3 blocks east. This is where the big boys play. You're embarrassing yourself." The old man looked at Preston. For a second, there was a flash of something dangerous in those blue eyes, a spark of authority that didn't match the tattered coat. But he remained silent. He just pointed to his half-eaten bread, indicating he wasn't finished. "Unbelievable," Preston laughed, turning to his entourage. "Look at the entitlement. He thinks he belongs here." Preston turned back, his face losing the smile. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "Get up!" The room was deadly silent. The air crackled with tension. "Roger," Preston barked, "if this bum isn't out of my seat in 10 seconds, I'm buying this building and firing you first. Do you understand?" Roger looked like he was about to faint. He turned to Sophie. "Get security, now!" Sophie didn't move toward security. She moved toward the table. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew she should stay out of it. She knew she needed this job, but she also knew bullying when she saw it. "Sir," Sophie said to Preston, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please, he's just finishing a meal. We can set up another table for you." Preston whipped around, looking at her as if she were a talking piece of furniture. "Excuse me. Did the help just speak?" "He's a human being," Sophie said, her voice shaking slightly. "He paid. He's eating." "He paid?" Preston laughed, a cruel barking sound. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a money clip, and peeled off a crisp $100 bill. He crumpled it into a ball and threw it at the old man. It bounced off the man's chest and landed in his soup bowl. "There," Preston sneered. "Now he's paid. Buy yourself a new coat. Better yet, buy a bath. Now get out of my sight." The old man looked at the money floating in his soup. He didn't touch it. He slowly wiped his mouth with a napkin. Then he spoke. It was a full sentence this time, clear, sharp, and commanding. But it was in a language that sounded like wind howling through a fjord. Roger looked confused. Preston looked annoyed. "What is he babbling about?" Preston asked. "Is he drunk?" Sophie froze. Her ears pricked up. The sounds were familiar. The vowels were rounded, the consonants hard and rhythmic. She replayed the sentence in her head. It wasn't gibberish. It was distinct. It was Islandska, Icelandic. She had studied Old Norse and Modern Icelandic for 3 years in college, fascinated by how little the language had changed over 1,000 years. It was a language of sagas, of warriors, and of people who survived the harshest winters on Earth. The old man hadn't just mumbled. He had said, "Sasem demir man of kledum hans, blindur fyria salini sem tau hylja." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the old man. He was looking at Preston, waiting. Preston leaned in, mocking him. "Speak English, Grandpa, or don't you have the brain cells?" The old man shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He prepared to stand up, to surrender the table to the loud, rich man in the suit. But Sophie couldn't let it happen. She stepped forward, breaking the invisible barrier between staff and guest. "He's not drunk," Sophie said clearly. Preston turned to her. "What?" "He's not babbling," Sophie said, her voice gaining strength. She looked directly at the old man, meeting his icy blue eyes. She took a deep breath. She hadn't spoken the language out loud in 2 years, not since her favorite professor passed away. But the words were there, etched in her memory. She spoke to the old man in his native tongue. "Nej, herra, thu tharft eki ad fara. Þessi madur fifelsem ser, eki verdmeti thot tad, stedi fyrir framan han." "No, sir, you do not need to go. This man is a fool who would not see value if it stood right in front of him." The silence that followed Sophie's words was heavier than the oak tables in the room. It wasn't just that she had spoken. It was the way she had spoken. Her voice, usually soft and apologetic, the voice of a servant trained to disappear, had dropped an octave. It was resonant, guttural, and filled with the ancient cadence of the North. Preston Calloway blinked, his mouth slightly ajar. The smirk flickered, uncertain for the first time. He looked from Sophie to the old man, his brain trying to process the shift in power dynamics. "What did you just say?" Preston demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Are you cursing at me in whatever that gargoyle language is?" The old man, who had been staring at the soup Preston had ruined, slowly lifted his head. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Not a happy smile, but the grim satisfaction of a warrior recognizing a shield mate. He answered Sophie, ignoring Preston entirely. "Tagat her, barn. En or dugga scamt gegen osnum." "Thank you, child, but words do little against a donkey." Sophie couldn't help it. A small, genuine smile broke through her fear. She replied, keeping her eyes locked on the old man's. "San lekurin bitu samt, herra. Jaffenvel thot asnar, finni eki feirir honum." "The truth bites anyway, sir, even if donkeys cannot feel it." "Stop it!" Preston shouted, slamming his hand on the table again. The crystal glasses rattled. "I am the customer. I am the one paying your salary. Speak English." Roger Banks, recovering from his initial paralysis, saw his career flashing before his eyes. Preston Calloway was a VIP. Sophie was disposable. The math, in Roger's small mind, was simple. "Sophie," Roger screeched, rushing forward and grabbing her arm roughly. "You are fired. Get out. Right now." Sophie flinched as his fingers dug into her bicep. "Roger, let go. I don't care what you were doing." Roger spat, sweat beading on his upper lip. "You insulted Mr. Calloway. You brought this vagrant. Bread without payment. You are done at the Gilded Oak. Done in this city if I have anything to say about it." Preston smoothed his lapels, his confidence returning, now that the manager was doing his dirty work. "That's right," Preston sneered. "And make sure she doesn't get a reference. I want her blacklisted. Who does she think she is?" Sophie pulled her arm free. She looked around the restaurant. The other diners, wealthy men in suits, women in pearls, were watching avidly, treating her humiliation as dinner theatre. Not one of them stood up. Not one of them said, "That's not fair." She unpinned her name tag. It felt heavy in her hand. "You don't have to fire me, Roger," Sophie said, her voice trembling but clear. "I wouldn't want to work for a coward anyway." She dropped the name tag into the soup bowl, right on top of Preston's soggy $100 bill. "Keep the change," she whispered. She turned on her heel and walked toward the door. Her legs felt like lead. Her heart was shattering. She had rent due in 3 days. She had $400 in her bank account. This moment of bravery was going to cost her everything. As she pushed through the heavy wooden doors and out into the biting Seattle rain, she heard a commotion behind her. "Hey, where are you going? I wasn't finished with you," Preston's voice echoed. But then, a deeper voice cut through the noise. A voice speaking English, but with an accent so thick and authoritative it sounded like a gavel striking a block. "Enough." Sophie paused on the sidewalk, the rain instantly soaking her uniform. The restaurant door opened again. It wasn't Roger. It wasn't Preston. It was the old man. He stepped out into the downpour, ignoring the cold. He still held his canvas bag. He walked up to Sophie, who was hugging herself against the chill. "You speak the tongue of the West Fjords," he said. His English was perfect, though the accent was strong. Not the Reykjavik dialect, the old tongue. "Where did you learn?" Sophie wiped rain and tears from her eyes. "My professor, Dr. Arland. He was from Ísafjorda. He taught me before he died. He said it was a language for people who endure." The old man nodded slowly. The rain dripped from his silver hair, but he didn't seem to notice. He looked like a statue carved from granite. "People who endure," he repeated. "A rare breed in this city of glass and plastic." He reached into the pocket of his tattered grey coat. Sophie stiffened, wondering if he was going to ask for money. Instead, he pulled out a small, heavy object. It wasn't a business card. It was a metal coin, silver and cold, stamped with a strange symbol, a lighthouse standing against a breaking wave. "My name is Magnus," he said. "Magnus Halvorsen." Sophie took the coin. It was heavy. "I'm Sophie." "Sophie," Magnus said, testing the name. "You lost your livelihood tonight because you defended a stranger who offered you nothing." "It was the right thing to do," Sophie said, her voice small. "I'm tired of people like him thinking they own the world." Magnus's eyes flashed with that intense blue light. "They think they own the world because we let them. But the tide always turns, Sophie. The tide always turns." He gestured to the street. A black sedan, sleek and unremarkable, pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, revealing a driver in a suit. "Go home, Sophie," Magnus said. "Dry off. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Go to the address on the back of that coin. Do not be late." "What is it?" Sophie asked, confused. "A job agency?" Magnus opened the back door of the sedan. Before he got in, he looked back at her. "No, it is an opportunity to teach the donkeys a lesson." He got in. The car pulled away, disappearing into the rainy night, leaving Sophie standing alone on the sidewalk with a silver coin and no job. The adrenaline wore off by the time Sophie got back to her apartment in the university district. The reality set in like a cold fever. Her apartment was a shoebox, a converted attic space with a radiator that hissed but gave no heat and a window that rattled in the wind. She sat on her sagging mattress, shivering, staring at the silver coin. Magnus Halvorsen. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Maybe he was a retired professor, a fisherman who had lost his way. The car had been nice, but anyone could hire an Uber Black. Sophie checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her landlord, Mr. Henderson. She didn't pick up. She knew what he wanted. Rent was due on the 1st. It was the 4th. The next morning, the sun did not come out. Seattle remained trapped in a grey gloom. Sophie woke up with a headache and a sense of impending doom. She made coffee, instant, watery, and opened her laptop. She needed a job. Now. She applied to 3 cafes, 2 bookstores, and a call center. By noon, she received her first rejection. Ding. An email from Seattle Hospitality Group. "Dear Ms. Bennett, regarding your application for the Emerald Lounge. We have received notice from the Restaurant Association regarding a disciplinary termination at your previous employer. Unfortunately, we cannot move forward with your application." Sophie's blood ran cold. Roger hadn't just fired her, he had flagged her in the local hospitality database. Preston Calloway's influence. He probably told Roger to make sure she never worked in a high-end place again. She was blacklisted. She closed her laptop, fighting the urge to scream. She had $380 left after buying groceries. Her student loan payment was auto-drafting $150 tomorrow. That left her with $230. Rent was $1,200. She looked at the coin sitting on her nightstand. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. She flipped the coin over. Engraved on the back was an address, 1001 Waterfront BLVD, Suite 4000. She Googled it. The result made her frown. 1001 Waterfront was the location of the Spire, the tallest, newest, most expensive glass tower in the city. It housed hedge funds, tech giants, and international consulates. Suite 4000, she muttered. That has to be the penthouse. Doubt gnawed at her. Was the old man crazy? Did he give her the address to a building he didn't own just to send her on a wild goose chase? Or worse, was he a janitor there? But she had no other options. The hospitality industry had shut its doors on her. The next morning, Sophie put on her only suit, a charcoal grey blazer and slacks she had bought for interviews she never got. She brushed her hair back, trying to look professional, trying to hide the fact that she was terrified. She took the bus downtown. The city was waking up, the streets filled with people rushing to jobs they hated but were lucky to have. Sophie walked toward the Spire. It pierced the clouds, a needle of steel and glass reflecting the grey sky. She walked into the lobby. It was like a cathedral of capitalism. The ceilings were 40 feet high. The floors were white marble. She approached the security desk. A guard, built like a linebacker, looked her up and down. "ID?" he grunted. Sophie handed over her driver's license. "I'm here for... well, I was told to come to Suite 4000. The guard paused. He typed something into his computer. His eyebrows shot up. He looked at Sophie again, this time with a distinct lack of dismissal. He actually looked nervous. "Suite 4000, he repeated. "Top floor." He handed her a specific pass, a black card with no name, just a silver chip. "Elevator bank C. It's a direct lift. Scan the card." Sophie took the pass, her hands shaking. Who is in Suite 4000? The guard lowered his voice. "Lady, if you have a meeting up there, you know more than I do. Nobody goes up there unless they're summoned. Good luck." Sophie walked to elevator C. She scanned the card. The doors slid open silently. There were no buttons inside, just a smooth panel. As soon as she stepped in, the doors closed, and the elevator shot upward. Her ears popped. 20 floors, 40 floors, 50. The elevator slowed and chimed softly. The doors opened. Sophie stepped out, expecting a reception desk. Instead, she stepped directly into a room that looked less like an office and more like a Nordic palace floating in the sky. The entire floor was open concept, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a 360-degree view of Seattle, the Puget Sound, and the Olympic Mountains. The floor was made of reclaimed timber, rough-hewn and dark. In the center of the room sat a massive desk made of a single slab of black stone. And behind the desk sat Magnus Halvorsen. He wasn't wearing the dirty grey coat. He was wearing a suit that was clearly bespoke, cut from dark blue wool that looked soft enough to sleep on. His silver hair was combed back. He looked powerful, imposing, and terrifyingly competent. But the eyes were the same, piercing, icy blue. Standing next to him was a woman in her 40s, with sharp glasses and a tablet, his assistant. "You are punctuality itself," Magnus said, not looking up from a document he was signing with a fountain pen. 30 seconds early. Sophie stood near the elevator, clutching her purse. "Mr. Halvorsen?" Magnus capped his pen and looked up. "Come in, Sophie. Sit." He gestured to a leather chair in front of the desk. Sophie walked across the vast room, her heels clicking on the wood. She sat down, feeling incredibly small. "I don't understand," Sophie stammered. "The restaurant, the coat, the bus." "A test," Magnus said simply. "I own the Gilded Oak. In fact, I own the building the Gilded Oak is in. I also own the bank that holds the mortgage on Preston Calloway's penthouse. Sophie's jaw dropped. You own the restaurant? Then why dress like a beggar? Magnus leaned back, steepling his fingers. Because, Sophie, when you wear a suit like this, he gestured to his attire, everyone laughs at your jokes. Everyone agrees with your opinions. Everyone lies to you. I needed to know if the staff at my newest acquisition had integrity. I needed to see how they treat the least among us. He sighed, his expression hardening. I was disappointed. Roger Banks is a spineless weasel. The staff are trained monkeys, except for one. He looked at her intensely. You stood up for me when I had nothing to offer you but a glass of water. You sacrificed your income to defend my dignity. That is rare. That is value. Sophie felt tears pricking her eyes again. The validation was overwhelming. I couldn't watch him treat you like that. And you speak Icelandic, Magnus added, a twinkle in his eye, which is convenient because my main holding company, Halvorsen Maritime, is based in Reykjavik. I have been looking for a liaison. Someone who can translate not just words, but intent. Someone who can read a room and tell me who the liars are. He slid a folder across the black stone desk. This is an employment contract. Executive assistant to the chairman. The starting salary is $120,000 a year, plus full benefits and a housing allowance. Sophie stared at the folder. $120,000. That was 4 times what she made as a waitress. It was life-changing. It was freedom. I don't know anything about maritime law or business, she whispered. I can teach you business, Magnus said firmly. I cannot teach you character. You have that already. Sophie opened the folder. The contract was real. Her name was already printed on it. There is one condition, Magnus said, his voice dropping to a lower, more conspiratorial tone. Sophie looked up. What is it? Preston Calloway, Magnus said. The name came out like a curse. He is trying to buy a shipping route from my company. He thinks he is dealing with a faceless board of directors. He has a meeting scheduled with the chairman next Friday. He does not know I am the chairman. He has never seen my face, only my lawyer's. Magnus leaned forward, a predator's grin spreading across his face. I want you to handle the preliminary meeting. I want you to be the face of Halvorsen Maritime when he walks through those doors. I want to see if he recognizes the servant he tried to destroy. Sophie felt a cold shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. Karma wasn't just coming, it was being meticulously planned in a penthouse suite. He destroyed my reputation in the hospitality industry, Sophie said, her voice hardening. He tried to make me homeless. Yes, Magnus agreed. So are you ready to show him that the girl who pours the water can also drown the rat? Sophie picked up the pen. She didn't hesitate. She signed her name on the dotted line. I'm ready, she said. The next week was a blur, a whirlwind that erased Sophie the waitress and built Sophie the executive. Magnus didn't just give her a job, he gave her an armory. First, it was the wardrobe. Magnus's assistant, a terrifyingly efficient woman named Clara, took Sophie to a private boutique in Bellevue. The polyester uniforms and sensible shoes were replaced. Mr. Halvorsen prefers sharp lines, Clara said, pulling a cream-colored power suit from the rack. You are his voice now. You must look like you can silence a room without speaking. They bought Italian silk blouses, tailored trousers that fit perfectly, and a pair of heels that were high enough to be imposing, but sturdy enough to walk on marble. Then came the briefing. Sophie spent 12 hours a day in the library of the Spire, studying the files on Calloway Ventures. She learned everything about Preston Calloway. She learned that his wealth was leveraged to the hilt. He lived on credit and loans, moving money from one shell company to another to keep up the appearance of a billionaire. He was desperate for the Halverson deal because he needed the shipping rights to secure a massive loan from a Japanese bank. Without this deal, Preston's house of cards would collapse within months. He wasn't just a bully. He was a desperate bully. He underestimates everyone, Magnus told her on Thursday night. They were eating dinner in the office, takeout from a Thai place, eating out of cartons. It was the most human Sophie had felt in years. He looks at numbers, not people. That is his fatal flaw. He won't recognize me, Sophie said, looking at her reflection in the glass window. Her hair was cut into a sharp bob. Her makeup was professional, her posture different. She looked like a CEO, not a server. He never really looked at me. He looked through me. Exactly, Magnus said, and that is why the trap will work. Friday morning arrived. The sky was blue, a rare, crisp Seattle day. The meeting was set for 11 a.m. in the main conference room of Halverson Maritime. Sophie stood at the head of the long mahogany table. The room was intimidating, lined with oil paintings of stormy seas and Viking ships. Magnus was not in the room. He was in the adjoining observation room, watching through a one-way mirror. He had told Sophie, "I want to watch him squirm before I deliver the killing blow." At 10:55 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Preston Calloway walked in. He looked exactly as he had at the restaurant, perhaps even more arrogant. He was wearing a grey pinstripe suit, checking his gold Rolex. He was flanked by his usual entourage, the two laughing yes men, and Jessica, who was still on her phone. God, these places are always so dreary, Preston muttered loudly as he entered the conference room. Smells like old money and dead fish. His associates chuckled sycophantically. Preston threw his briefcase onto the table and looked toward the head of the table, expecting to see an old, dusty European lawyer. Instead, he saw a woman in a cream suit, standing with her hands clasped behind her back, staring out the window. "Excuse me," Preston barked. "I'm here to see the chairman, or at least a senior partner. Get me coffee while we wait. Black, 2 sugars." Sophie didn't move. She didn't turn around. She let the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable. "Hello? Are you deaf?" Preston snapped. "I said, get me coffee." Sophie slowly turned around. She locked eyes with him. Her expression was completely neutral, devoid of the fear she had felt in the restaurant. She looked at him with the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor. "I'm afraid we don't serve coffee to guests who lack manners, Mr. Calloway," Sophie said. Her voice was steady, projecting power. Preston froze. He squinted at her. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a confusing sense of déjà vu, but his brain refused to make the connection. To him, the waitress in the apron and this executive in the silk suit were 2 different species. "Do I know you?" Preston asked, his tone wary. "You certainly made an impression on me," Sophie said, walking slowly to the head chair. The chairman's chair. She sat down. Preston's face reddened. "That is the chairman's seat. You can't sit there." "I speak for the chairman," Sophie said calmly. "My name is Sophie Bennett. I am the Director of External Affairs for Halverson Maritime. And you, Mr. Calloway, are late." Preston bristled, checking his watch. "I am right on time, and I don't deal with directors. I deal with decision-makers. Get your boss on the phone. I have a term sheet to sign." "The term sheet," Sophie said, picking up a document from the table. She held it up. "You mean this proposal? Where you offer 10% below market value for our Arctic shipping lanes, backed by collateral that you don't actually own." Preston's face went pale. "Excuse me." That information is confidential." "Nothing is confidential when you are begging for a lifeline, Preston," Sophie said, dropping his first name intentionally to disrespect him. She opened the folder. "We've reviewed your financials. You're over-leveraged on the downtown condo project. Your pharmaceutical shorts failed last week. You are, to put it politely, broke." Preston slammed his hands on the table. "Listen to me, you little. I don't know who you think you are, but I will ruin you. I know people in this town." "I know," Sophie said, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "You know Roger Banks. You're very good at getting waitresses fired. But you're not very good at business." Preston stopped breathing. The colour drained from his face completely. He stared at her, really stared at her. The waitress. The girl with the water pitcher. "You," he whispered. "The restaurant. The girl. The homeless man." "He wasn't homeless," Sophie said softly. "And I wasn't just a waitress. I was the only person in the room who understood the language being spoken." Preston looked around the room, panic setting in. This is a setup. Where is Halverson? Bring him out." "He's been watching you the whole time," Sophie said. She pressed a button on the table. The wall behind her buzzed, and the panel slid open to reveal the glass partition. Standing there, arms crossed, wearing a suit that cost more than Preston's car, was the homeless man. Magnus Halvorsen. He wasn't looking at the floor anymore. He was looking at Preston with the eyes of a wolf looking at a wounded deer. Magnus pressed the intercom button. His voice filled the conference room, amplified and booming. "Sa sem grefur, grof fyrir adra, fellor oft I hanna sjálfur." He who digs a grave for others often falls into it himself. Preston stepped back, knocking his chair over. Mr. Halvorsen. It was a misunderstanding. I didn't know it was you." Sophie stood up. She picked up Preston's proposal file. "The chairman doesn't do business with people who lack vision, Mr. Calloway. Or basic humanity." She walked over to the shredder in the corner of the room. Preston watched in horror as she fed his multi-million-dollar proposal into the machine. Whirr. The sound of paper tearing was the only sound in the room. "Get out," Sophie said. Preston looked at his associates, who were already backing away from him. He looked at Magnus behind the glass. He looked at Sophie. He opened his mouth to speak, but found he had no voice left. He turned and fled the room, his dignity left in shreds alongside his contract. The elevator ride down from the 40th floor was the longest of Preston Calloway's life. When he entered the lobby of the Spire, his entourage was gone. Jessica and the two yes men had seen the writing on the wall the moment Sophie fed the contract into the shredder. They had taken the freight elevator to avoid being seen with a corpse, because socially and financially, that is what Preston was. A walking corpse. He pulled out his phone. He had 5 missed calls from his CFO. "What?" Preston snapped into the phone as he burst out onto the sidewalk. The rain had stopped, but the world felt colder than ever. "Preston, the Japanese bank pulled the financing." The CFO's voice was shaking. "They said they received a risk assessment update from an anonymous source regarding the stability of our shipping logistics. Without the Halvorsen deal, they're invoking the immediate repayment clause on the bridge loan." "They can't do that!" Preston screamed, ignoring the pedestrian staring at him. "Tell them to wait. I'll find another partner." "It gets worse," the CFO whispered. "The news is out. Someone leaked that you were rejected by Halvorsen Maritime. The rumor is you're toxic. Our stock price has dropped 14% in the last 20 minutes. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. They want your resignation, Preston." Preston dropped the hand holding the phone. He stood on the corner of 4th and Pike, the very intersection he used to look down on from his office, feeling the crushing weight of reality. Magnus Halvorsen hadn't just rejected a deal, he had orchestrated a demolition. Across the street, a black sedan idled. The window rolled down just an inch. Preston couldn't see inside, but he knew who was watching. He turned and ran, hailing a taxi, desperate to escape the gaze of the blue-eyed wolf. But the nightmare was only beginning. Over the next 48 hours, Preston's life was dismantled with surgical precision. The risk assessment Magnus had sent to the banks was just the first domino. On Monday morning, the bank seized Preston's penthouse. On Tuesday, his leased Aston Martin was towed from the company garage while his employees watched. On Wednesday, the board voted him out of his own company, stripping him of his CEO title and leaving him with nothing but his debt. He was a pariah. The same restaurants that used to hold his table indefinitely now suddenly had no availability. The friends who drank his champagne stopped answering his texts. He had treated the world like a transaction, and now the bill had come due. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere inside the Gilded Oak was brittle, as if the air itself was made of thin glass waiting to shatter. The dinner rush hadn't started yet, but the tension was already suffocating. Rumors had been circulating through the kitchen staff like wildfire. The restaurant had been sold. The faceless investment group that had owned the place for a decade had offloaded the property in a lightning-fast cash deal to a private holding company, Vikinger Assets LLC. Roger Banks was pacing by the host stand, a sheen of cold sweat glistening on his forehead. He checked his reflection in the brass railing for the 10th time that hour. "Who are they?" Roger hissed at the head bartender, a man named Thomas who had worked there for 20 years and seen managers come and go. "Are they corporate? Are they restructuring? Am I safe?" "Nobody knows, Roger," Thomas replied, meticulously polishing a crystal tumbler. "The legal notice just said the new owner is coming in for a site inspection tonight at 7:30 p.m. That's all we know." Roger straightened his tie, his hands trembling slightly. "I need everything perfect. Tell the kitchen to prep the tasting menu. Polish the silverware twice. If I see a single water spot on a fork or a crumb on the carpet, heads will roll. Do you understand?" He was back in his element, using fear to mask his own insecurity. He barked orders at the busboys, criticized the flower arrangements, and yelled at a sous chef until the poor man was nearly in tears. Roger was terrified, and when Roger was terrified, he became a tyrant. At 6:55 p.m., a sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb outside. The rain was falling again, a classic Seattle drizzle, blurring the streetlights into streaks of gold and neon. Roger saw the car and practically sprinted to the heavy oak doors. He smoothed his hair, put on his most sycophantic, plastic smile, and swung the doors open wide. Welcome to the Gilded Oak," Roger announced, bowing slightly to the silhouette stepping out of the car. "We are honored to receive the representatives of Vikinger Assets. I am Roger Banks, the general manager, and I assure you—" The words died in his throat. His mouth hung open, making him look like a fish gasping for air. Walking through the door was not a suit-wearing corporate lawyer. It wasn't a board of directors. It was Sophie Bennett. But it wasn't the Sophie he knew. This wasn't the girl in the ill-fitting polyester uniform with the scuffed shoes. This woman was wearing a black dress that looked like it had been sculpted from midnight, tailored to perfection. Her hair was cut in a sharp, elegant bob. She wore heels that clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, a sound of authority, not servitude. And behind her, walking a step back like a silent, dangerous guardian, was Magnus Halvorsen. He was dressed in a tuxedo, the t-shirt and grey coat long gone. He looked every bit the billionaire titan of industry that he was. "Sophie," Roger whispered, his brain short-circuiting. The cognitive dissonance was too much. What? What are you doing here? He blinked, his old instincts kicking in. I told you, you're banned. You can't be here. If Mr. Calloway sees you, Mr. Calloway isn't coming, Roger, Sophie said. Her voice was calm, but it carried across the silent dining room, reaching the ears of every waiter and busboy who had frozen in their tracks. Mr. Calloway doesn't have a table anymore. In fact, I don't think Mr. Calloway can afford a table here anymore. Roger's face turned a blotchy red. I don't care. You are trespassing. Get out before I call the police. I have new owners arriving any second, and I will not let a disgruntled ex-waitress ruin my career. He reached out to grab her arm, just as he had done 2 weeks ago. But this time, a hand caught his wrist. A hand that felt like iron. Magnus Halverson didn't twist Roger's arm. He just held it, stopping him mid-motion. He looked down at Roger with those piercing, glacial blue eyes. I suggest you do not touch her, Magnus rumbled. Let go of me, Roger squeaked, trying to pull away. Who do you think you are? Security. I am the owner, Magnus said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clinking of glasses in the bar stopped. I bought the building, Roger, Magnus continued, releasing Roger's wrist with a dismissive flick. I bought the land, and I bought the restaurant. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick document bound in blue leather. And then, Magnus said, a small, wolfish smile playing on his lips, I gifted the deed to the restaurant to my new director of operations. He handed the document to Sophie. Ms. Bennett owns the Gilded Oak. Roger stared at the document in Sophie's hands. He looked at the staff, who were watching with wide eyes. He looked at Sophie. The color drained from his face so completely, he looked like a sheet of paper. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the host stand to stay upright. You own it? Roger stammered. Sophie took a step forward. The sound of her heel striking the floor echoed like a gavel. Roger, she said softly, do you remember what you told me when you fired me? You said I was disposable. You said I was nobody. I was just doing my job, Roger pleaded, sweat pouring down his face. Sophie, Miss Bennett, please, you have to understand. Preston Calloway, he pressured me. I have a family. I have a mortgage. I know, Sophie said, her voice devoid of pity. I had rent. I had student loans. And you threw me out into the rain without a second thought because a rich man told you to. She looked around the restaurant. She saw the faces of her former co-workers, Sarah, the hostess who was always kind, Leo, the young busboy who was terrified of Roger, Thomas, the bartender. They were all watching her, a mixture of shock and hope on their faces. I could fire you right now, Sophie said. Roger flinched. Please, I've given 10 years to this place. I could blacklist you, Sophie continued, her voice hardening. I could make one phone call to the Restaurant Association and ensure you never manage a lemonade stand in this city again. That is what you tried to do to me, isn't it? Roger hung his head, defeated. Tears of humiliation welled in his eyes. Yes, he whispered. I'm sorry. Sophie let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds. But I'm not going to do that, she said. Roger looked up, hope sparking in his eyes. You aren't? No, Sophie said, because unlike you, I don't believe in destroying people just because I have the power to do so. However, you are not fit to lead. She pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the restaurant, toward the swinging double doors of the kitchen. We are short-staffed tonight, Sophie said. The dishwasher called in sick. The position pays minimum wage. It's hot, it's wet, and it's back-breaking work. Roger stared at her, horrified. You can't be serious. You have a choice, Roger, Sophie said. You can walk out that front door right now, unemployed and with no reference. Or you can take off that jacket, put on an apron, and start scrubbing. If you work hard, show respect to the staff you used to bully, and learn some humility. Maybe in 6 months we can discuss a promotion to busboy. The entire room held its breath. It was a punishment that fit the crime perfectly. It wasn't about money. It was about status. Roger, the man who worshipped status, was being offered the lowest rung on the ladder. Roger looked at the front door, the exit. Then he looked at the kitchen. He thought about his mortgage. He thought about his ego. Slowly, painfully, with shaking hands, Roger Banks took off his expensive suit jacket. He loosened his tie. He unpinned his general manager name tag and placed it on the host stand. "Thank you for the opportunity," he choked out. He walked past Sophie, past Magnus, and past the staff he used to terrorize. He pushed through the kitchen doors, disappearing into the steam and noise of the scullery. A moment later, Thomas the bartender started clapping. Then Sarah joined in. Then the line cooks. Soon the entire staff was applauding, not out of cruelty, but out of relief. The tyrant was gone. Sophie turned to them, raising a hand to quiet the room. "Things are going to be different here," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "From now on, nobody is judged by their coat. If someone is hungry, we feed them. If someone is cold, we offer them a seat. And if anyone, customer or manager, treats my staff like servants instead of human beings, they will answer to me. And," Magnus added, his voice booming, "everyone gets a raise, 20%, starting tonight." The cheer that erupted was deafening. Sophie smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. She turned to Magnus. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Consider it a bonus." Magnus winked. "Now, I believe we have a reservation." They walked together across the plush carpet to table 9, the corner booth with the panoramic view of the Space Needle and the city lights, the table where Sophie had poured water for a beggar, the table where Preston Calloway had sealed his own fate. The booth was empty, waiting for them. Sophie sat down, sliding across the velvet. Magnus sat opposite her. A young waiter approached the table. It was Leo. He was trembling, holding a water pitcher with both hands. "Good evening, Miss Bennett. Mr. Halverson," Leo stammered. "Water for the table?" Sophie looked at Leo. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of making a mistake, the fear she had lived with for years. "Leo," Sophie said gently. The boy froze. "Yes, Mom?" "Take a breath," she said warmly. "You're doing a great job. And Leo?" "Yes. Bring some bread, and make sure it's warm." Leo smiled, his shoulders relaxing. "Right away, Miss Bennett." As the boy hurried off, Sophie looked out the window. The rain was still falling, washing the city clean. Somewhere out there, Preston Calloway was learning what it felt to be powerless. Somewhere in the back, Roger was scrubbing a pot, learning the value of hard labor. And here, at the best table in the city, the girl who spoke the language of the North finally found her voice. Magnus raised his crystal water glass. The ice clinked softly. "Skal," he said, the ancient toast of his people. Sophie raised her glass, meeting his eyes. "Skal," she replied. She took a sip. It was just water. But it tasted like victory. And that is the story of how a single act of kindness and a few words in an ancient tongue toppled a billionaire. It's a powerful reminder that true value isn't found in a bank account or a designer suit, but in character, integrity, and how we treat those who can do nothing for us. Preston Calloway learned the hard way that when you judge a book by its cover, you might just miss the whole story. If you enjoyed this story of karmic justice and hidden identities, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. What did you think of Sophie's revenge? Was making Roger a dishwasher too harsh or exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below.